to take a look at volume and surface area of some more shapes. So we're going to look at pyramids, cones, and spheres. So first of all, coming up with our formulas. First of all, for volume, and taking a look at our sphere, the only measurement that we have for a sphere is radius. So remember that volume is cubic units, which means that we're going to have an r cubed as part of that formula. And that's exactly what we have. The formula for volume of a sphere is 4/3 pi r cubed. For our surface area, again, radius is the only measure we have, so we have an r squared since we measure area or surface area in square units. For our cone, notice that we have a base for the cone of a circle, just like our cylinder, but our cylinder is straight up on the sides where our cone is slanted. So the volume of a cone is actually 1/3 the volume of a cylinder with the same base. And we know that the cylinder, the formula for volume was pi r squared times height. So we have 1/3 pi r squared times height. For surface area, covering all of our surfaces, we obviously are going to have our pi r squared for the area of the circle on the bottom, and then the sides is going to be pi r times the slant. Okay, so we have our lateral surface area, which it just means side, and we have our base for our pi r squared. Now, we're not always going to be given our slant height, but we notice that with our height and our radius of our cone, that creates a 90-degree triangle. So we can calculate the slant by using Pythagorean theorem. C is our slant, that's the hypotenuse of our right angled triangle. So slant squared is equal to r squared plus h squared. And we can calculate that slant, or vice versa, we can calculate our height if we know the slant. For our square base pyramid, our volume, again noticing that the base of our pyramid is a square, just like we have a rectangular prism, we can also take 1/3 of a rectangular prism. Now, the only difference is that we have base squared instead of length times width. Length times width are the same, so we can just call it base. And it's 1/3 of a rectangular prism because we have slanted sides. So volume of a square base pyramid is 1/3 base squared times height. For our surface area, again, keeping in mind that we need to add up all 5 sides. So our base, we know we can just take base squared, the square on the bottom, and we have 4 triangles on the sides of our pyramid. So we're going to be using the 4 triangles. We know base times height divided by 2, but the height of our triangle in this case is actually the slant. So 4 of those, and we're going to take our base times our slant divided by 2 for our 4 triangles. So again, this is our lateral surface area, and this is our base. And again, noticing that in here, if we don't have the slant height, we can use the same as we did before. Slant squared is equal to height squared, but our bottom means that we only have half of the base. It only goes halfway across the base. So we're going to have to take our base divided by 2 and square it. Okay, so that's how those formulas are kind of developed, and a way to remember how we set it up and what kind of measurements we should be using. So taking a look at some examples. So example number 1, and we're just going to draw our right angle in here. Determine the volume and surface area of the figure below. So we have a square-based pyramid. So first of all, let's find our volume. So our volume, starting with our formula, is going to be 1/3 base squared times height. Subbing in our numbers, our base is 5.2. We're going to square that, and we're going to multiply by 4.1. When we put this into the calculator, we can do our 5.2 squared times 4.1, and then we're going to divide by 3. Now, if it's easier, you could also take 1 divided by 3 times 5.2 squared times 4.1. Whatever is easiest for you, because we're just multiplying all of those numbers together. So when we do that, rounding to 1 decimal place, we get 37.0 cubic meters. For our surface area, again, starting with our formula, so we're going to have base squared plus 4 times base times slant divided by 2. Now, we notice that we don't have our slant. So we're going to go and we're going to calculate our slant. So slant squared equals height squared. And remember that we have to take our base divided by 2 and square that. So subbing in our numbers, our height is 4.1, and we're going to sub in our 5.2 divided by 2 and square it. And again, we can do this all in one step in our calculator. We're going to keep a couple of decimal places or a number of decimal places because we know that we have to use this in the next step. So 5.2 divided by 2 gives us 2.6. 2.6 squared plus 4.1 squared. And then we're going to square root that entire answer. And when we do that, we get 4.8548. And we're going to keep as many decimal places as we can. So now that we know our slant, we're going to go back down here and we're going to sub in our numbers. So we're going to have 5.2 squared. And notice that we can simplify this formula here. Dividing by 2 and multiplying by 4 ultimately means we're just going to multiply by 2. Okay? If we can simplify that, we can go ahead. If we're not sure how to do that, we can just do our multiplying in our final answer as well. So we're going to have 5.2 times 4.8548. And if we have that number in our calculator right now, it is just as easy to use that as well. We can just take that times 5.2 times 2 plus 5.2 squared. And rounding to 1 decimal place, we get 77.5 meters squared. Okay, we're going to do the same thing with example number 2, but when we're reading the question, we notice that determine the volume and lateral surface area. So we don't want the area of the bottom, we only want the sides. So we'll take a look at that in just a moment. When we're going to do volume of our cone, we're going to have 1/3 pi r squared h. Now, again, we notice that this 9.5 should be our height. So 1/3 times pi times 6 squared times 9.5. And when we do that, again, your choice of what order you want to put that into your calculator. 1 divided by 3 times pi using your pi button times 6 squared times 9.5. And when we do that, we get 358.1 centimeters cubed. Now, surface area, we have just our formula pi r squared plus pi rs. But we want to take a look at what part is our base that we're not going to include in this because we only want the lateral surface area. So we're going to take out the pi r squared part of the formula because we only want the lateral surface area. So pi times r, but we notice we don't have the slant. So again, we're going to have to calculate our slant, and we're going to have our height squared plus radius squared. So we're going to have 9.5 squared plus 6 squared. Punching that into our calculators, 9.5 squared plus 6 squared equals and square root. And again, we're going to keep extra decimal places here because we know we want as precise an answer for our surface area as we can. So rounding or not rounding, keeping as many decimal places as we can, we're going to now sub that into our formula. And again, if we still have that number in our calculator, we're going to use that whole number and multiply by pi and multiply by 6. And when we do that, we should get 211.8, and this should be in inches. Sorry, guys. Both of these measures should be in inches. So cubic inches for our volume and square inches for our surface area. And again, notice that when we are doing square inches or cubic inches, we have to use the letters with the exponent of 2 or 3 on top of it. Okay, so some questions to practice from your worksheet. They're actually from the textbook.